Saludos everybody, welcome back to Decent Shirt, where we play cards while we wear decent shirts. And for today's video, we have some shocking news. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you just stumbled upon my deck profile on the one, the only, Thunderbox. If you haven't been living under a rock, then you should already know that this is arguably the strongest deck in the format, not only topping and winning the tournament, but also making finals with basically a Thunderbox deck. And I took a gander at it, made my own version, so let's talk about it. So let's show the deck. We do have, obviously, the crux of this deck, what makes this deck broken, the 3 Astrabbits. I feel like this card is gonna get inevitably hit in the ban list at some point because it just feels too good, even without the Sparking, even without the main Nexus Celestial. It just feels that good. And if you should be familiar with this card. This card is used in practically every single deck. I do not need to explain why this card is good. Just know that this deck still runs even without having a main way of nexusing towards that card. Alright, we do have also our 3 Electrics. Again, another card that I do not need to introduce because you guys are already familiar with it. But for those in the back that really are getting into the game, Electric lets you search for your Divine Rune the moment that it's cast, and in this deck it is highly important that you do get your Divine Runes. So Electric searches for that card. We do have our 3 Joltens. Jolten, another searcher of the deck. Notice a trend here, right? We have a way to filter through your top decks to add a card to your hand, a way to search out your Divine Runes, and now a way to search for your stadiums. We do play max copies of it because this Thunder deck has kind of evolved from a Nexus deck to sort of a searching deck, always constantly searching, and it technically already was that, but now it hones in on it. It's like its main thing. So Electric searches for Divine Runes, and Jolten searches for your stadiums. In this case, our Mount Atlantis, which we will talk about later on. We do play 2 Toxians. I do not believe that a 3rd Toxian is really necessary. You kind of have enough pressure with what you have here, but still 2 is still really solid. This is really nice to swing for games, and if your opponent does not respect the Toxians, there are times where you can just get to game with just 1 Toxian at the end of the game. Lastly, to round off our Thunder package, we do play the newest Arcalith. Arcalith is absolutely insane. It is the card that basically made Thunder come back alive after we lost Sparkit. If you are not familiar with what it does, it basically says that when you normal cast it, you can enchant up to 3 Thunder Spirits from your underworld to anywhere in the board. That means that you can enchant and proc multiple Astrabbits if you have it in play. You are able to also enchant multiple spirits to your Zeus if you're low on spirits there. And it just has a huge amount of utility in this deck. One of my favorite plays to do with the Arcalith is just wait till the end game where you can just ascend over any of your ELESTRALs, usually from an Astrabbit, and then cast the Arcalith and put 3 spirits onto the Arcalith and swing for really big damage. And to round off our ELESTRALs, we do play 2 Spectrus. Spectrus is still a really solid card. I do play at least 2 elves because it allows me to run over things. Usually Water Nexus that likes to play Galaxies and Foamy, so Spectrus helps out with that a lot. It also helps against solar decks like Nebuleo and other cards that in general it's just the spot that normally you would have put the Viserys in. Now you have the Spectrus, which has a lot more utility than technically the Viserys. still really solid. Now, let's talk about the runes, which is what basically put this deck apart. Hey guys, hope you're enjoying the video. I know I just paused it, but it's just a quick reminder that if you haven't liked the video and you are enjoying it, please click that like button. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We're trying to get 100 subscribers, and you could help us get one step closer to that. So, having said that, let's just move on. We do have 2 Zeus. The Zeus is the crux of this deck. If Astrabbit is the heart of this deck, then Zeus is the crux. It's the enforcer of this deck. When you disenchant, you can lower the stats of your opponent's Celestials by -3, both in attack and defense, which is really solid. And we're going to see that it has a lot of more synergy than just being able to cast and lower the stats, at least to run over. We do play 2 Mount Olympus. Mount Olympus is very self-explanatory. You search it for Jolten. It allows to raise your stats. That usually makes the Astrabbit 6 at defense, which is really important because it helps you combat those 5 guys decks. It also makes it so that your other Elestrals, the Electric, your Jolten, and your Toxian, get into that 5 range, which makes them a lot more respectable and a lot harder to justify crashing into them. And lastly, it makes Arcalith just really strong because naturally it'll just have 8, but if you're able to amass a bunch of spirits on Arcalith, then suddenly it reaches higher numbers that even allows you to run over things like Chronodile and stuff. So since we are playing the Mount Olympus, I do think that we do have to talk about the Race to the Top. Race to the Top was introduced in Frostfall. It was a really big card for Thunder, as if it needed the help. And now that Earthquake is out of the picture, Race to the Top becomes the premier destruction card for this deck. However, we do pair Race to the Top with another destruction card that we're going to talk about in a bit. But the idea is basically to search out Jolten. Jolten searches Mount Olympus, and now that Mount Olympus is live, Race to the Top allows you to target 2 Elestrals on the board, whether that is yours or your opponent, and the Elestral with the lowest defense out of the 2 targeted gets destroyed. So the idea is usually you're going to have Jolten under Mount Olympus. That means that you're going to have 3 defense. There's not that many Elestrals currently in the game that have 3 or even 2 defense. So that means that normally Race to the Top is going to be enough with a Jolten. But even then, you do also have Astrabbit, which under Mount Olympus is going to have 6 defense. That means that Race to the Top is going to probably be able to run over most cards in the game. The cards that you're going to have the most difficulty to deal with, however, are probably going to be the big Ascensions, which is fine. That's part of the format as it is, right? But as we saw in the tournament, that doesn't mean that the deck cannot compete, because it amasses so much advantage in your hand that you can normally draw into the outs to stop those big Ascensions. So speaking of those outs, we do have Cryoblast in this deck. Cryoblast in the Thunder deck is absolutely crazy. If you don't know what it does, basically it can target a non-frost enchanted Elestral, and until the end phase, that Elestral gets -2 defense. But if that Elestral's defense is basically, if that Elestral's defense reaches 0 by the end of that turn, then that Elestral is automatically destroyed, which is really solid because it means that you can pair this with stuff like Zeus, right? Cryoblast normally would only be able to lower the stats to 2, which is still really solid. But now that you have Zeus in play, that means that you can lower the defense to -5, which means that this deck can actually pop things that are not just 1-drops. You can actually get over a lot of different cards. If the Zeus doesn't lower the attack enough for you to run over it, then the Cryoblast allows you to sweeten the deal by lowering 5 in total with both of them of the defense, which more often than not, that just means that the Elestral is going to get popped. The only exception tends to be the Ascensions, as we talked about. But again, this deck does have enough resources. Maybe you can combine Sue's Cryoblast and Race to the Top, which is a 3-card combo, I know. But the fact that the possibility is still there, it's really solid, because sometimes you do just need that one card to get out a big Ascension that your opponent has already invested a lot of energies into, and with that you just win the game. And this deck just excels at searching. So honestly, it's really, really strong in testing. It just felt like a league above everything else, because it just feels like you're always plussing. Not to mention that if you proc Astrabbit multiple times, you're just going to have so much hand advantage that your opponent is going to be having a real tough time to get over. We do play our 3 Ambrosias, kind of mandatory, even though this deck is not a very expensive. Ambrosia is still really solid, and it allows you to swing knowing that you can still have the upper hand. We do have 3 Gorgons cases. I do not need to talk about Gorgons. It's one of the best cards in the game, and right now it's really solid to stop Ascension plays. We do have 2 poison tipped arrows. We do play 2 PTAs. We do not play a 3rd PTA, but definitely in the side deck I would recommend. We do play only 2 because we do have Race to the Top and Cryoblast. But if we didn't have as many destructions, I would probably race the poison tipped arrow. We also have 2 Shields of Achilles. Still a really solid card. Not as good as it used to be in theory, but still really solid. Now that Lavalith is out of the picture, Shield of Achilles is a lot more live now, and that just makes the whole deck feel like it can actually compete, and it doesn't have to live in fear of the Lavaliths. We do have 2 Altar of Stars. Again, the deck used to fear Lavalith all the time because it meant that your Zeus basically was always in danger. But now that we don't have to worry about Lavalith as much, Altar of Stars is a really solid card, because again, you can Nexus into the Astrabbit or Detox them, and you're able to again amass a lot of advantage, whether that is by burning your opponent or adding cards to your hand while also playing it defensively. And lastly, we do play 2 Tsunamis, because water is still really strong in this deck. Having a way to lower and shut down a turn is really solid for this deck. Alright, and moving on to our spirit count. We have 14 Scepters. And there we go. 14 Scepters. Seems like a lot, but honestly, it just feels like the perfect math. You can technically lower this to 12 if you really wanted to add something like an Earthquake or something, but 14 has always felt nice, and I really haven't had any problems with the count of spirits. We do also have 2 Lunar, 2 Leviathan or 2 Water, and 2 Fleur Mines. 14 helps us with the math of Thunder, 2 for the Spectres that we have and for any dense fog shenanigans that we might see, 2 Leviathan to counter against other opposing Tsunamis, and also to proc our own Tsunamis, and 2 Fleur Mines to cast our Cryoblasts, also allowing us to enchant Frost to our own Elestrals to make sure that they cannot Cryoblast our own Elestrals as well. Alright, and with that, we are done. Let's move on to the outro. Alright guys, so what you think about the list? Make sure to write down in the comment section if you like the list, if you don't like it, what things would you change. I'm always open to criticism, and I just love deck building in general. So I like to test things, I love to test ideas, and Thunder Nexus just feels like it's a completely different deck to how it was in base set. It feels like it can actually do things that are actually fair in a way. Like, it feels more to the theme, because back then it was all about like discarding cards from your hand and controlling the board with Spark It. Now it's so much more than that, and that's what I love about this deck. I used to hate this deck a lot back in base set, but now I absolutely love it, and I think it's probably one of my favorite decks to play there right now. So I would like to see what you guys have to say in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe if you haven't already. We're trying to get to 100 subscribers, and it would make a huge difference if you guys did. Having said that, I'll leave it to you. That Decent Shirt signing out.